Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive all about resilience and psychological well-being. We'll be focusing specifically on university students and their experience. For this deep dive, you sent over some fascinating sources that I think will help us understand all of this. A study from the International Journal of Higher Education and an essay review titled Resilience and Positive Psychology: Finding Hope.
Looking forward to getting into it.
I think we're going to uncover some really surprising stuff and some really interesting insights.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's jump right in. The International Journal of Higher Education article. It kind of maps out the typical challenges that students face,
Right.
like academic stress, financial burdens, even something as simple as a bad internet connection.
Yeah, I mean, it's all part of the experience, isn't it?
It really is. They covered everything.
Yeah.
But alongside those challenges, there's this incredible growth and self-discovery happening at the same time, right?
Absolutely. And that's really where resilience comes in.
So we're talking about more than just, bouncing back from a bad grade or a fight with
Yeah.
a roommate, right?
Yeah, that's right. The essay review that you sent dives into this a bit more and talks about resilience being about adapting, functioning well even when things are tough. It's really about developing competence in spite of those difficult circumstances.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not about avoiding hardship altogether. It's about, learning how to navigate it all effectively.
Yeah.
Here's something that really blew my mind from the essay, though. Did you know that about half of the kids and teens who go through something as traumatic as sexual abuse, they actually don't show signs of mental health or developmental problems?
It is a powerful statistic, right?
Yeah.
It really makes you question that assumption that trauma automatically leads to lasting damage. It suggests that resilience is a lot more common than we tend to think, and that humans have an incredible capacity for adaptation and growth, even when faced with some pretty extreme adversity.
So what is it that makes the difference? What are the things that make someone resilient?
Both sources that you sent point to a mix of things, individual factors and environmental factors. On the individual side, we see things like optimism playing a big role. This is where the work of someone like Martin Seligman comes in.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him. Isn't he one of the big names in positive psychology?
Exactly.
Could you give us a little background on who Seligman is and what this whole positive psychology thing is all about?
Sure. So Seligman is considered one of the founders of positive psychology, which is essentially the study of what makes people thrive.
Okay.
Instead of focusing on mental illness and what goes wrong, positive psychology looks at strengths, virtues, and the things that help people and communities really flourish.
So it's like instead of just fixing what's broken, we're trying to understand and amplify what's working.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Seligman's work on learned optimism is a good example of this. He found that people who believe they have control over their lives and can influence outcomes are more resilient in the face of setbacks.
Okay, so it's not just about positive thinking, it's about believing in your ability to make a difference.
Right. They'd see those challenges as opportunities for growth rather than just these insurmountable obstacles.
That's really interesting. So even if someone wasn't born with this really positive outlook, they can actually learn to be more optimistic.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really empowering idea, isn't it?
It is. It is very encouraging. So we talked about optimism as an individual factor. What other things did the sources highlight?
But there are a lot of interesting ones, actually.
Mhm.
The essay mentions a sense of adventure, courage, self-understanding, and even humor.
Humor.
Yeah, it might seem a bit counterintuitive, but having a sense of humor can be a really great coping mechanism when you're dealing with stress.
It's like finding the funny side of a difficult situation can help you detach from it emotionally and get a little perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And it's not just about these internal traits, of course. The environment also plays a huge role.
Right. Because you could be the most optimistic person in the world, but if you're surrounded by negativity or a lack of support, it's going to be much harder to stay resilient.
Exactly. And both of the sources emphasize the importance of strong social connections,
Yeah.
like having family friends, mentors, or even just a sense of community. Having those people you can rely on who believe in you and can offer support when things are tough is really crucial.
It really does take a village, or in this case, a campus.
That's a great way to put it.
Speaking of university students, the International Journal of Higher Education study that we talked about before, it looks specifically at how resilience impacted their well-being, right?
Yeah, they focused on Malaysian university undergraduates, and they found that resilience was a strong predictor of overall psychological well-being.
Hmm.
So the more resilient the student was, the better they were doing in terms of mental and emotional health.
That makes sense. If you're better equipped to deal with all that pressure and everything that comes with being a university student, of course you're going to feel better overall. But I have to imagine that resilience also impacts things like academic performance and success beyond university as well.
Oh, absolutely. Resilient people tend to cope better with stress, solve problems more effectively, and maintain motivation even when they experience setbacks,
Right.
which are all qualities that are really valuable both in academic and professional settings.
It sounds like resilience is like this superpower for navigating the challenges that life throws at you, whether it's a tough exam, a difficult boss, or even just trying to figure out what you want to do with your life.
I like that analogy
Yeah.
because it really is about having the tools and the mindset to navigate those challenges effectively and maybe even come out stronger on the other side.
So now that we've laid this groundwork, I'm curious to dive deeper into this whole positive psychology thing. What are some of the techniques or interventions that it offers for building resilience?
That's a great question, and I think it's one of the most exciting aspects of positive psychology. It suggests that we can actually cultivate positive emotions and behaviors rather than just waiting for them to happen to us.
So it's not just about thinking happy thoughts, it's about taking concrete actions to build a more resilient life.
Exactly.
Mm.
And that's where things get really interesting. So positive psychology offers all these strategies for building resilience, like practicing gratitude, mindfulness, cultivating strong social connections, finding meaning and purpose in life.
It sounds like a very well-rounded approach. It's not just about fixing one specific problem, but building a life that supports well-being from all these different angles.
Yeah. And one of the most powerful techniques that Seligman developed is called learned optimism. It focuses on reframing those negative thought patterns and developing a more optimistic way of thinking.
So instead of just letting those inner critics run wild, we can learn to challenge them and maybe even replace that negative self-talk with something more empowering.
Exactly. And it's not about denying reality or pretending everything is perfect. It's more about seeing those challenges as opportunities for growth and developing a belief in your ability to overcome them.
It's about that shift in perspective, right? Instead of saying, woe is me, you can ask yourself, okay, what can I learn from this? How can I use this to grow?
Yeah. And as cliche as it sounds, practicing gratitude can make a big difference too. Taking time to think about the good things in your life, even the small things, can shift your focus away from the negativity.
It's like training your brain to see the silver lining instead of getting stuck in the rain cloud.
Right. And another powerful tool for building resilience is mindfulness meditation. There's a lot of research showing that regular mindfulness practice can help regulate emotions, reduce stress, and just enhance your ability to deal with those difficult situations.
You know, I've heard a lot about mindfulness, but I've always been a little skeptical. It sounds a little too woo-woo for me.
I get it. It can sound that way sometimes, but I think if you break it down, it makes a lot of sense. Mindfulness is really just about paying attention to the present moment without judging it. It's about noticing those thoughts and feelings and sensations without getting completely swept away by them.
So it's like hitting the pause button on that mental chatter and just observing what's happening without getting all caught up in the drama.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the more you practice mindfulness, the easier it becomes to see those thought patterns that fuel anxiety and stress. You develop this greater awareness, and you can choose how you want to respond.
That sounds really useful, especially in those pressure cooker situations when it's so easy to panic or get overwhelmed by fear.
Exactly. And the great thing about mindfulness is that anyone can practice it. You don't need any special equipment or training. You can start with just a few minutes each day. Just focus on your breathing, or simply notice the sensations in your body.
Okay, that actually sounds a lot less intimidating than I thought. But what about those times when mindfulness just isn't enough? What about those really tough situations where the stress is overwhelming and you don't know where to turn?
Well, that's where those social connections come in. Remember, we're not meant to go through this alone. Reaching out to a trusted friend, family member, or even a therapist can make a huge difference.
It's like having a lifeline when you feel like you're drowning. Just knowing someone cares and is there to listen can make you feel so much better.
Exactly. Sometimes just talking about what you're going through can help you see things more clearly. It can also remind you that you're not alone in this struggle, which can make you feel less ashamed or isolated.
It's like that saying, a problem shared is a problem halved.
I love that. It really emphasizes how important it is to create a culture of support and compassion, both in our personal lives and in our communities.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We explored the challenges students face, we talked about resilience, and we even touched on positive psychology. But there's something I'm still wondering about. The essay you sent mentioned that if resilience is so common, why do some groups like those in the child welfare system end up with these negative outcomes?
That's a really important point, and it challenges us to look beyond the individual factors. The fact that certain groups consistently face such negative outcomes, even if resilience is common, suggests that something else is at play. Maybe we need to look at the systems and environments that are preventing resilience rather than focusing on fixing people.
So instead of asking what's wrong with this person, maybe we should be asking what's wrong with the system.
Exactly. And that's where things can get really complicated because even some well-intentioned interventions can sometimes hinder resilience.
Wait, how is that possible?
Well, think about it this way. If systems are set up to protect people by removing them from challenges or difficult situations, it can actually stop them from developing the skills they need to be resilient.
So it's like that overprotective parent who never lets their kid fall down and scrape their knees. The kid might avoid getting hurt in the short term, but they'll never learn how to get back up on their own.
Exactly. It's a tricky balance, of course, because you don't want to put people in harm's way.
Yeah.
But we also have to recognize that adversity, when navigated effectively, can actually make you stronger and more resilient.
It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But how does all this connect back to the topic of psychological well-being?
If we understand that resilience is about more than just individual traits, if it's really shaped by our social and environmental contexts, then we start to see that psychological well-being isn't just an individual pursuit, it becomes a collective responsibility.
Okay, so what does it mean to look at psychological well-being as a shared responsibility?
I think it means recognizing that we all have a role to play in building communities and systems that support well-being. It means advocating for policies that address inequalities and remove barriers to opportunities and resources. And it also means fighting against stigma and discrimination that can really damage people's mental health.
Thinking back to those university support services we talked about, it's not enough to just have a counseling center hidden away on campus. It's about creating this whole network of support, peer networks, mentorship programs, even just professors who are trained to recognize when a student might be struggling.
Yeah, it's not just about providing services, it's about fostering a culture of care and compassion. A community where it's okay to ask for help, where vulnerability is seen as a strength, and where everyone feels like they belong.
I love that. A culture of care and compassion. It sounds so much more inviting than that survival of the fittest attitude you see in so many high-pressure environments like universities. But let's be realistic. Not everyone is going to magically become a super empathetic person overnight. So what are some real things individuals can do to help create this shift?
That's a great question, and one that I think deserves a lot of thought. We need to move away from the idea of fixing ourselves and start thinking about how we can work together to build more resilient communities.
So it's less about self-help and more about we help. I like that. But where do we even start?
I think one of the most important things is to challenge the assumptions we have about trauma. That idea that going through something difficult automatically means you're damaged or broken.
Right.
That kind of thinking can be so harmful. It creates stigma and makes people afraid to reach out for help when they really need it.
It's like telling someone with a broken leg to just walk it off. Sometimes you need a cast and crutches to heal properly.
Exactly. We need to normalize the idea that everyone struggles sometimes, and asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. And when we see someone struggling, instead of jumping in with judgments or advice, we can just listen with empathy and offer support.
And maybe even point them toward those resilience-building resources we talked about.
Exactly. Because here's the thing about resilience. It can be contagious. When you see someone else overcoming adversity, it gives you hope and reminds you that you can do it too.
So it's like a ripple effect. One person's resilience can inspire a whole community.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to celebrate those stories of resilience, to highlight that even in the darkest times, there's always hope for growth and change.
It's like that Leonard Cohen lyric, "There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in."
I love that. It reminds me that resilience isn't about being invulnerable. It's about embracing the messiness of life and finding ways to keep moving forward, even when things are hard.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into resilience and psychological well-being, what's the biggest takeaway for you?
It's really those deeply ingrained assumptions about trauma and resilience that fascinate me. It's so easy to fall into that trap of thinking difficult experiences equal lifelong damage, but it's just not that simple.
Yeah, it's almost like we've been so focused on what goes wrong that we've overlooked this incredible capacity for healing and growth that's inside all of us.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole conversation so hopeful. Resilience isn't some rare superpower. It's a human capacity that we all have. And while it's influenced by so many things, it's ultimately something we can all work on and strengthen.
So as you're listening, think about this. What are some small but meaningful steps you can take today to build your own resilience or help foster it in someone else's life?
Maybe it's reaching out to a friend who's struggling or practicing gratitude for the good things you have.
Or maybe it's challenging those negative thoughts and focusing on solutions instead of problems.
Remember, resilience isn't a destination. It's a journey, and it's a journey we can take together.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into resilience and psychological well-being.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.